Welcome to the Dream Novel channel. Before starting to listen to the fun in this clip, don't forget to like and comment, so that the admin will have the encouragement to continue making clips. Let's go listen. Channel Dream Novel. Chapter 191, First Entry into the Chamber of Secrets. Late at night, on the third floor of the castle, laughter and a piercing scream suddenly echoed from the girls' bathroom down the hallway on the left side of the stairs. A ghost with glasses bolted through the wall in a flurry, glancing back in distress. A moment later, the bathroom door creaked open from the inside, and Peeves emerged, cackling wildly, holding a water balloon. His waist was decked out with a brand new bag stuffed with balloons of every color, ready for more mischief. After the two ghosts finally vanished from the corridor, a shadowy figure emerged from the corner, the air shimmering as if twisted. "Phew, they're finally gone," Kyle muttered, lifting the disillusionment charm. He walked over to the bathroom door, pushing it open. The neglected wooden door groaned loudly, as if protesting. Inside, the small bathroom was thick with dust, abandoned and bleak. Ignoring the grime, Kyle approached the line of sinks, his eyes scanning over them until he found what he was looking for, a faucet with a tiny snake engraved on its side. "This should be it," Kyle murmured, running his fingers over the little snake. The entrance to the Chamber of Secrets. Kyle had wrestled with the decision of coming here for quite a while. He knew that with his current abilities, he stood no chance against the basilisk lurking inside. And unlike Harry, he wouldn't have the aid of Fawkes or the Sorting Hat. Still, he had come anyway. If only for a scrap of the basilisk's shed scales, this trip was worth it. Basilisks, much like dragons, were almost made of treasure, every part of them valuable. Basilisk skin, in particular, was a highly prized potion ingredient. Even a palm-sized piece fetched 10 galleons on the black market, if one was lucky enough to find any. The basilisk in the Chamber of Secrets was nearly 20 feet long, enough to yield a small fortune in scales. Kyle had barely managed to hold himself back this long. He traced his finger over the snake and made a strange hissing noise. Open. Although Kyle didn't need Parseltongue to communicate with snakes and other magical creatures, the faucet did. And respond to his natural ability. So, during his stay with Newt, Kyle had made a point of finding a runespore and learning a few phrases in Parseltongue from it. His pronunciation might not have been flawless, but it was convincing enough. Sure enough, the faucet glowed with a brilliant white light and started spinning rapidly. As it rotated, the sink began to shift, eventually revealing a thick pipe, wide enough to fit a person. Kyle touched the suitcase strapped to his side and took out his broomstick, then climbed inside the pipe without hesitation. The dim light in the pipe revealed layers of slimy residue coating the walls. Riding his broomstick, Kyle navigated downward, twisting through 7 or 8 turns until he finally exited the pipe. Dismounting from the broom, he found himself in a vast, dark stone tunnel, large enough for a person to stand in comfortably. Lumos. Kyle's wand flared to life, casting a faint glow in the tunnel as he walked carefully forward. The darkness was so thick that his wand illuminated only a small area ahead, while his shadow stretched long, distorting into monstrous shapes along the damp, uneven walls. The ground was littered with mouse bones, scattered across the moist floor, bones that Scabbers would probably find to his taste. Kyle moved slowly, eyes scanning his surroundings, prepared to bolt at the first sign of movement. After a few minutes, Kyle rounded a dark corner, and there it was, a huge, coiled shape lying motionless in the distance. Quickening his pace, he approached, lifting his wand higher. The light fell upon a massive snake skin, green with a glossy sheen and shimmering with golden highlights. Without hesitation, Kyle opened his trunk and carefully stashed the precious find inside. He examined the area a bit more but only came across a few small fragments of snake skin. This one was the only complete piece. Relieved, Kyle relaxed a little. The single intact skin suggested that the basilisk rarely frequented this part of the tunnel. If his guess was right, this skin had been shed 50 years ago, when Tom Riddle first opened the Chamber of Secrets. Kyle continued forward, though still gripping his broomstick tightly, keeping his senses sharp just in case. On the way, he collected every fragment he encountered, determined to make the most of his trip. At last, Kyle reached the tunnel's end, where a solid stone wall barred his way. Engraved into the wall were two intertwined snakes, their eyes inlaid with large, gleaming emeralds. He reached out, pressing his hand against one of the gems. If I snapped these gems off, would the door refuse to open? With a small grin, Kyle tried to pry one loose, but no matter what he tried, magic or brute force, the gem wouldn't budge. It felt fused with the wall itself, as if it were an inseparable part of the stone. After several attempts, he was out of breath and slightly frustrated. "Forget it," he muttered, giving up with a sigh. He looked into the emerald-eyed snakes and let out another low, rasping hiss. Immediately, the two snakes slid apart, and the stone wall cracked down the middle, slowly splitting and sliding aside. Kyle took a deep breath, braced himself, and reached into his box to ensure his supplies were in order, then stepped through the doorway. Beyond the wall lay a long, dimly lit chamber, lined with towering stone pillars coiled in relief with carved serpents. As he entered, he noticed that there was no trace of snake skin here, the path ahead was completely bare. With his wand in one hand, a rooster in the other, and the broomstick tucked under his arm, Kyle made his way slowly between the serpent-emblazoned columns. Each step echoed in the vast, shadowed space, reverberating off the stone walls like a ghostly whisper. He scanned the room thoroughly, confirming there were no other exits or air ducts aside from the one he'd come through. Finally reassured, he walked forward confidently. At the end of the chamber, standing against the darkened back wall, was an immense statue. It depicted a figure with the face of a weathered old man, his features almost simian, with a sparse, twisted beard that nearly reached the floor. "Salazar Slytherin," Kyle murmured, narrowing his eyes. "He doesn't look too impressive. Lady Hufflepuff looks far more like a legendary wizard." Kyle tilted his head thoughtfully. He knew that if he spoke the final command in Parseltongue, the statue's mouth would open, and the basilisk would be summoned from its slumber. Waking the basilisk? Kyle hesitated, weighing his options. Channel Dream Novel. Chapter 192, The Chaotic Castle. After a long hesitation, Kyle ultimately chose not to open the Slytherin statue to awaken the basilisk. His reluctance wasn't out of fear that the basilisk might kill him. Though the basilisk, one of the deadliest magical creatures, able to kill with a single glance, was terrifying, it also had a peculiar and very pronounced weakness. It would flee in terror at the sound of a rooster's crow, a noise fatal to it. It might sound absurd, but an ordinary rooster could indeed kill one of the wizarding world's most fearsome creatures. Kyle had come well prepared. Before this expedition, he had gone to Hogsmeade, where he ordered over 100 roosters through the Owl Post Office, each one fortified with a potion to boost its vitality. The roosters were now cramped in his suitcase, full of energy and raucously crowing. Even a slight crack in the lid unleashed a deafening burst of clucks and crows that echoed furiously through the Chamber of Secrets. In this silent, echoing chamber, the cacophony of 100 roosters would be amplified tenfold. If Kyle were to release them all, the basilisk wouldn't stand a chance. It would be lucky to survive even a second. But Kyle didn't want to kill the basilisk, nor did he want it reduced to a one-time treasure trove. What he needed was a way to make the creature obey him, something that was proving to be quite a challenge. Unlike Riddle, he had no connection to Slytherin, nor any inkling on how to control the basilisk. No, there has to be a way. I can't let that Voldemort brat keep it for himself, he thought, his eyes narrowing. He suddenly considered a particular ghost, Ravenclaw's Grey Lady, also known as Helena Ravenclaw. As the daughter of Rowena Ravenclaw, one of Hogwarts' 4 founders, she might know something. Reluctantly stifling the urge to unleash the basilisk, Kyle turned and exited the Chamber of Secrets, glancing back every few steps. Thankfully, with Voldemort currently preoccupied by his pursuit of the Philosopher's Stone, Kyle still had time to make his next move. Once he'd left the chamber, he mounted his broomstick and retraced his path to Moaning Myrtle's bathroom. As he hopped off the broom, the sink that concealed the entrance smoothly slid back into place, sealing the passage. The bathroom was quiet, and Myrtle hadn't returned yet. Not wanting to linger, Kyle quickly erased any traces of his presence and slipped out of the bathroom under a disillusionment charm. The castle corridors were silent in the early hours, less eerie than the Chamber of Secrets but still shrouded in darkness. He gave a quick glance toward the library door but decided against detouring for any late-night book copying and instead headed straight back to his dormitory. He'd barely taken a few steps when a piercing, spine-chilling scream shattered the silence. Startled, and fresh out of the Chamber of Secrets, Kyle instinctively thought of the basilisk. His hand jerked, and before he realized it, he'd accidentally opened the suitcase. A torrent of roosters, energized and raring to go, exploded out of the suitcase, spilling like a feathery fountain into the corridor. Kyle, regaining his senses, snapped the suitcase shut, but it was too late. More than half the roosters had escaped. Instantly, the hallway came alive. The eerie scream from the library mingled with the crowing of dozens of roosters, creating a symphony of chaos that echoed through the castle like a bizarre concert. By Merlin's beard! What are you doing in the library in the middle of the night instead of sleeping? Kyle slapped his forehead, muttering a curse under his breath. A young wizard brazenly breaking school rules like that deserved to be docked 100 points. But before he could stew any longer, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed from downstairs. It was Filch, holding a dim oil lamp as he approached quickly. Damn it! Kyle cursed, frowning. He hadn't brought his invisibility cloak. While the disillusionment charm was effective, it still cast a faint shadow that would be revealed by the lamplight. Seeing Filch nearing the stairs, Kyle didn't hesitate. He turned and bolted up to the next floor. He remembered a secret passage on the 4th floor, hidden behind a suit of armor, which led directly to the underground classroom corridor. Come out, I can see you. Filch's irate voice rang out behind him, harsh even against the chorus of crowing roosters echoing through the corridors. When Kyle reached the 4th floor, something bumped into him, though when he looked back, he saw nothing. No one was around. Potter? Kyle muttered, narrowing his eyes as he considered who the unfortunate soul in the library might have been. Just then, he felt a soft, silken touch brush his hand, a sensation he recognized instantly. It was the cloak of invisibility. No way. Kyle quickened his pace. Soon, he spotted Snape up ahead, alongside Professor McGonagall, still in her nightdress. The incessant clamor of crowing had alerted every professor in the castle, and McGonagall and Snape were the first to respond. Kyle pressed himself against the wall, holding his breath. Getting caught now would spell disaster. What's going on, Severus? Professor McGonagall demanded. Someone apparently found Christmas a bit dull and decided to create some excitement, Snape replied coolly. It's hilarious, really. Keeping everyone awake, whoever's responsible, I'll have them in detention for 100 years. Professors. Filch's voice broke through as he finally reached them on the stairs. There was someone in the library, in the restricted section. I found a broken oil lamp there. Nighttime, in the restricted area, disturbing the entire castle. 200 points and a month of detention. Professor McGonagall's eyes blazed with fury. Restricted area? Snape sneered. Then they can't have gone far. We'll catch them for sure. Leave the catching to Argus, McGonagall replied sharply. Severus, first we have to handle the chaos here, or the students won't get a wink of sleep. Good heavens, how did they even get into the castle in the first place? Kyle's pulse quickened as the two professors drew closer, knowing the disillusionment charm wouldn't fool their sharp eyes. If they turned the corner, he'd be spotted instantly. Taking a deep breath, he began stepping backward, inching quietly away from their voices. He glanced around frantically, his eyes lighting up as he spotted a slightly open door on his right. Without a second thought, he squeezed himself through the narrow gap and shut it softly behind him. Almost simultaneously, McGonagall and Snape appeared in the corridor he had just vacated. Students these days are really out of control." McGonagall huffed. "Minerva, I suggest we go check the dormitories to see who's missing tonight," Snape said with a dark glint in his eyes. Channel Dream Novel. Chapter 193, Doing Good Deeds Anonymously. Kyle leaned against the wall, listening as the footsteps outside gradually faded away. Ssh, a soft intake of breath sounded from a distance. Harry lifted his cloak of invisibility and, as if by magic, suddenly appeared in the room. Oblivious to the fact that he wasn't alone, he let the cloak slip away and began to survey the room. His gaze soon landed on an imposing mirror, and with piqued curiosity, he approached, wanting a look at his reflection. As Harry stepped up to the mirror, he found himself unable to move, captivated by what he saw. Not far away, Kyle, who had witnessed everything, rubbed his forehead. He had seen this mirror last year in the headmaster's office. It was the mirror of Eriste. Kyle knew the pull it would have on Harry, but now was not the time to be lost in its allure. Snape had just mentioned he was going to check the dormitories. Surely Harry hadn't forgotten. Fine. I'd better give him a nudge. As Kyle left the room, he made a loud noise on purpose and tossed a canute. As a skilled chaser, his aim was spot on. The canute arced through the air and landed precisely on Harry's forehead. Hopefully, that will snap him out of it. By then, there were no professors patrolling the fourth floor. After leaving the room, Kyle quickly ducked behind a suit of armor and slipped into a secret passage that led to the underground classroom. In the kitchen corridor, a few students had gathered, looking groggy but curious about the commotion and too nervous to leave the area. Using the disillusionment charm, Kyle blended into the crowd and returned to the common room with them once Professor Sprout arrived. "Kyle, did you sneak out?" In the common room, Conna, hugging a pillow, asked sleepily, "What on earth happened outside?" "I don't know," Kyle replied calmly, shaking his head. "I went out after I was woken up, but it was pitch dark, and I didn't see anyone." Conna nodded, looking dazed and only half listening. The next day, all of Hogwarts was abuzz with talk about the previous night's events, and nearly half the students were yawning over breakfast. "That was close," Ron mumbled, sleepily poking at a piece of fried egg on his plate. "Professor McGonagall almost caught you out of bed last night. How did you manage that?" "For the last time, Ron, it wasn't me," Harry said, sounding frustrated. "I was just at the library." "But, there was someone else," Harry insisted, recalling the details. "Remember that mirror I told you about? I was completely absorbed in looking at it when someone threw something and hit me. If they hadn't, McGonagall would have definitely caught me." "Well, that was actually kind of decent of them," Ron murmured thoughtfully. "They could have ignored you, and then any points lost or detentions would have been yours alone. They would have stayed out of it completely." "Exactly. But who could it have been?" Harry glanced around the Great Hall. "Ron, do you think someone else has a cloak of invisibility like mine?" He hadn't noticed anyone else nearby last night, just as Filch hadn't seen him. And, as far as Harry could tell, only the cloak of invisibility could accomplish that. "I don't think so," Ron mused, shaking his head. "The cloak of invisibility is a rare item, even among wizards. But, maybe Malfoy might have one." He recalled Malfoy spending 100 galleons on a toy just before Christmas. If he wanted a cloak of invisibility, it wouldn't be out of reach. "Yeah, you're right," Harry nodded, guessing Ron's line of thought. "But Malfoy went home for the holidays. He wasn't at school yesterday." "True, that's a pity." Ron sighed. After a quiet moment, Harry's thoughts returned to the mirror and the image he'd seen. The figures from the mirror lingered in his mind. Could they have been his parents? The glimpse had been too brief for him to be sure, and he resolved to return that night. Unbeknownst to them, Fred and George, who were nearby, overheard their conversation. "Did you catch that, George? Cloak of invisibility?" Fred raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Of course, Fred," George replied in a low voice, grinning. "There aren't many around here with a cloak of invisibility, and one of them happens to be our dear friend. Lucky we stayed at school over Christmas, or we'd have missed all the fun. True, Fred nodded with a smirk. Kyle's a legend, getting everyone up 5 hours early. Brilliant idea. Fred glanced toward the Hufflepuff table and wondered aloud, but why isn't Kyle in the hall yet? I'm itching to ask him what happened. Probably still sleeping, George replied. Hufflepuff's common room is next to the kitchen, so he can grab a bite whenever he wants. That's convenient. Fred sighed. If only we could move Gryffindor's common room closer. Yeah, then we wouldn't have to trek downstairs every night. Meanwhile, the professors at the head table were having a similar conversation. They had combed through each house's dormitories the night before, only to find no students missing. We must have gone too late, Snape muttered, glancing toward Harry. I suggest we ask the fat lady if any young wizard slipped out in the middle of the night. Professor McGonagall pursed her lips, giving Snape a thoughtful look. Severus, we don't consult the fat lady about our own students. Dumbledore, seated beside her, shook his head. And it wouldn't be fair to the other 3 houses. But you could try asking the portraits in the corridor. I will. Snape's expression darkened slightly as he shot another look toward Gryffindor before leaving the head table. Actually, I already have. After Snape had gone, Dumbledore winked at Professor McGonagall, chuckling. But they didn't see a thing. Quite a clever little wizard. Professor McGonagall frowned slightly, appearing unconvinced by Dumbledore's praise for cleverness. Unaware of her expression, Dumbledore continued slicing a piece of bacon. It's been a long time since Hogwarts was this lively. I'd bet Hagrid is thrilled. He's been fretting over the flesh-eating slugs in the vegetable garden, and now, that problem's taken care of. Channel Dream Novel. Chapter 194, Harry entranced by the Mirror of Erist. For a while, every night after curfew, a professor patrolled the castle grounds. Filch, who was driven nearly mad by the endless cock feathers scattered everywhere, had already cleaned them up 5 times. Still, every now and then, he would spot more. Sometimes they were around a corner in the corridor, sometimes by the archway. There seemed to be no end to them. This ordeal had made Filch even grumpier than usual, and he glared fiercely at everyone he encountered. If anyone so much as raised their voice, they became his target, scolded relentlessly. The students who bore the brunt of his frustration loathed it, but had no choice but to steer clear of him. Filch's behavior was implicitly sanctioned by a certain potions professor, and any show of dissatisfaction risked costing them house points. Kyle, too, had been keeping a low profile lately. Every day, he diligently went to the library to work on assignments and read, returning to his dorm on schedule. He'd put his late-night swims on hold for the time being. Fred and George had warned him that Filch prowled the second floor most of the night, while patrolling professors often popped into the library to check for stragglers. Under such close watch, sneaking around to copy books was far too risky, so Kyle decided to wait until the situation blew over. But not everyone was willing to wait. Harry Potter, for instance, had been obsessed with returning to the mirror ever since he realized who the people he saw in it were. He didn't intend to do anything when he went, just sit there, captivated, for hours. Ron tried to talk him out of it, but Harry wouldn't listen to a word. On the 3rd night, he finally ran into Dumbledore in the room. I didn't see you, sir. Harry stammered, his hands and feet icy with nerves. Only then did he remember that the professors had been cracking down on nighttime wandering. What if Dumbledore suspected he'd been the one causing trouble lately? The thought that Gryffindor could lose 200 points over this left Harry feeling hollow, as if he'd turned to ice inside. It's odd that you became nearsighted the moment you became invisible, Dumbledore said with a smile. Seeing the smile on Dumbledore's face, Harry exhaled a sigh of relief. Thankfully, Dumbledore didn't seem to be planning on taking any points. There was a patience and kindness about him, like a Muggle gentleman who often walked his dog in the mornings back in Little Whinging. From Dumbledore, Harry also began to understand the purpose of the Mirror of Erist. "This mirror shows us the deepest and most desperate desires of our hearts," Dumbledore said softly. "Many have wasted away before it, entranced by what they see, even going mad, because they can't tell if what they see is real or even attainable." Harry lowered his head, silent for a moment, before mumbling, "Sir. Professor Dumbledore, have you looked into the mirror, too?" "Yes, more than once," Dumbledore replied with a smile. "I must admit, the mirror's magic is hard to resist. Although, there is one exception." "Who's that?" Harry asked, intrigued. "A second-year student." Harry's eyes widened in surprise, and Dumbledore, noting his expression, gave a playful wink. "Why? Can't you believe it?" Harry shook his head. If Dumbledore had named some famous wizard or even a professor, he could have accepted it. But a second-year student, accomplishing something even Dumbledore couldn't manage. That seemed impossible. "Just as you think, in this regard, he is indeed better than me," Dumbledore mused after a moment's pause. He had 2 chances to gaze into the mirror of Eriste, but he walked away without hesitation each time. "Professor Dumbledore, could it be that he mistook it for an ordinary mirror?" Harry asked. "At first, I thought so too, but soon I realized that wasn't the case." Dumbledore shook his head. He knew exactly what the mirror of Eriste was and fully understood its purpose. "Who is he?" Harry pressed. "Do I know him?" But this time, Dumbledore didn't answer. "That's enough for tonight, Harry," he said, rising to his feet. "Tomorrow, the mirror will be moved to a new location. I ask you not to go searching for it again. Losing yourself in illusions, forgetting the reality of life, it's no help to you. Now, why don't you put on that remarkable invisibility cloak and return to bed?" Harry left the room still full of questions. Back in his dormitory bed, his mind kept returning to the mysterious second-year student Dumbledore had mentioned. But the only second years he knew were a few from Gryffindor and, of course, Kyle. Could it be him? Harry wondered, unsure. The next day, during lunch, Konna nudged Kyle, who was sitting across from her, and whispered, "Have you been up to anything lately, like going to the Quidditch pitch to practice?" "Of course not," Kyle replied, puzzled. "I've been in the library these past few days. I haven't gone anywhere else. Besides, the rest of the team is gone, it'd be pointless to train alone." "Why do you ask?" "Oh, it's nothing," Konna whispered, nodding subtly in the direction of the Gryffindor table. "It's just that Harry Potter keeps glancing over at you. I thought maybe you'd come up with some new Quidditch tactics, and he'd noticed." "Huh?" Kyle turned instinctively, just in time to catch Harry looking away hurriedly. "It wasn't just this time," Konna went on. "I've seen him sneaking looks at you a few times now." Kyle's stomach dropped. Could Harry have figured out that he'd also been in the room on the 4th floor that night? No, that was impossible. He'd been using a disillusionment charm the entire time. There was no way Harry could have seen him. And as for guessing, Harry wasn't that clever. "It's probably just about Quidditch," Kyle replied flatly. "Our match against Gryffindor is right after Christmas, after all. He might just be thinking up strategies and seeing me as some sort of imaginary rival." "Thinking up strategies?" Konna frowned. "But he's the Seeker. Does he even need tactics? It's probably another one of Wood's grand plans." "Who knows?" Kyle shrugged. "Forget about him. Aren't you supposed to be going to Snape's lessons today? How's your prep going?" "I've got everything ready, books, quills, parchment, ink." Konna's nerves flared at the mention of the lessons, and she couldn't help but cast a glance toward Harry again. In a quiet voice, she asked, "Kyle, do you think I should bring my cauldron?" "There's no need," Kyle replied, reassuringly. He'd never had to attend the potions class by himself, but he was certain Snape kept more than enough cauldrons on hand. Channel Dream Novel. Chapter 195. The way into the headmaster's office. The holiday period had passed in the blink of an eye, like dog food disappearing in front of Fluffy. Kyle felt as though he'd only just been in the library, flipping through books about basilisks, and then suddenly, he looked up and realized there were only a few days left until the start of term. On the morning of the third-to-last day before term started, Fred and George found him, bursting with excitement. "Kyle, we have some great news for you," Fred announced, his face glowing with enthusiasm. "We found the final clue for the Marauders map password." "So, the complete password is really hidden in the castle?" Kyle asked, surprised. Like Cedric, he had always thought the last word of the password might not exist. If he had been one of the Marauders, he wouldn't have left the full password behind. It's always better to keep a little mystery. Laying it all out would be boring. Besides, the hint had always been clear enough from the start. If someone couldn't figure out the full password, then maybe they weren't meant to have the Marauders map. No one would ever think the password was, "I solemnly swear I'll study hard." And if someone got too obsessed with finding the complete password, like Fred and George, then that missing word would make for a perfect prank. After all, someone who constantly breaks school rules isn't likely to be great at following instructions. Fred and George hadn't found it until now, so Kyle thought he had guessed right. "You'll never guess where it is," George said impatiently. "It's right above the railing near the school entrance. You can see it if you look up as you walk by." "We should have thought of it sooner," Fred said, a little annoyed. "Every graduate eventually leaves Hogwarts through the main gates, so it's the perfect spot to symbolize both a beginning and an ending. Why didn't we think of it sooner?" "So, how did you find it?" Kyle asked. George shrugged. "We were going to explore the Forbidden Forest, but Hagrid chased us out, so we stopped by Hogsmeade. It was still too early, most of the shops hadn't opened yet. We couldn't use the shortcut through the secret passage, so we had to go back the long way. When we passed the school gates, we saw the words on the wall immediately." George sighed suddenly. "Maybe we shouldn't always sneak back through the secret passage after visiting Hogsmeade. But speaking of secret passages," Fred said, his eyes lighting up as he patted Kyle on the shoulder and whispered, "After getting the complete password, we discovered 2 new secret passages. One's on the 4th floor, behind the statue of the hunchbacked one-eyed witch. Her hunchback is the entrance. The other one is even more hidden," Fred added, with a mysterious glint. "Want to guess where it is?" Behind the bookshelves in the headmaster's office." Kyle guessed with a serious expression, stroking his chin. "If that's the case, I'd bet the exit leads to a shop's common room in Hogsmeade, maybe the 3 Broomsticks, or Madame Putafoot's tea room." Fred and George were stunned. Not because Kyle had guessed correctly, in fact, there was no secret passage in the headmaster's office at all. But Kyle's words had sparked their imaginations. Just picture it, the greatest headmaster Hogwarts had ever seen secretly linked to a shopkeeper. How intriguing. Who doesn't love a bit of headmaster gossip? Fred and George couldn't help but dive in. They debated from every angle where the exit would be if there really were such a passage, finally deciding that it could lead to any shop in Hogsmeade. Even the Hog's Head. If Dumbledore weren't backing him up, that old goat would have been thrown out ages ago, Fred said with conviction. They'd known Hogsmeade well for years, and many shopkeepers had shared in hushed tones that the chaotic Hog's Head pub was seriously tarnishing the reputation of Hogsmeade. It was even the reason they hadn't been named Most Worthwhile Wizarding Village of the Year for more than a decade. Unfortunately, there are no secret passages marked in the headmaster's office on the Marauders map, Fred continued, sounding disappointed. "We only know it's on the 8th floor, but we've never set foot in there, not once. After all, it's the headmaster's office, one of the most mysterious places at Hogwarts," George said, shaking his head. "I'd bet even the creators of the Marauders map barely got in there, let alone had the chance to search for hidden passages. I'd love to sneak in for a look, even if just for a few minutes," Fred mused wistfully. "Want to go into the headmaster's office?" Kyle thought for a moment before saying, "That's easy." Fred and George's eyes lit up, and they eagerly slung their arms around Kyle's shoulders. Kyle, I knew you'd have an idea. Tell us. If you get us in, Fred and I will be your most loyal minions. We'll save seats for you. Provide meal deliveries. And take care of anyone who gives you trouble. But only on the condition that we don't get demerits, or detention. Don't worry, you won't, Kyle replied calmly. All you have to do is win a special award for services to the school, and that'll earn you 100 points. Fred and George's smiles froze. They looked at Kyle in disbelief, as if he'd turned into a three-headed dog that could tap dance. To Fred and George, finding a three-headed dog that could tap dance would be easier than winning a special award for services to the school. At least that seemed remotely possible. If you find that too troublesome, Kyle continued, noting their expressions, the Order of Merlin would do just as well. That should net you an extra 200 points. Ha! George and Fred let out identical groans, then turned and walked away. Hey, you haven't told me where the last secret passage is, Kyle called after them. But the twins pretended not to hear, quickening their pace. The last secret passage they'd been about to tell him about was actually just beneath the Whomping Willow. Originally, they'd come over to invite Kyle to join them in figuring out a way to dodge the willow's vicious branches. Now, however, they just wanted to be anywhere Kyle wasn't. And as for the Order of Merlin, he thought it was what, a pebble by the side of the road? Something you could just pick up whenever you liked. If it were that easy, he'd have one himself. Now the fun in this clip is over. Which listeners haven't liked and commented yet? You can press like and comment to encourage the admin find the fun in the next clip. May the listeners be happy forever.